It's great to be with you all today. And hello to the Copenhagen Democracy Summit. It's an honor to be with you and with Secretary General Rasmussen, a friend of freedom-loving people all across the world. I don't know if you all know this, but when it comes to strengthening transatlantic relations, Anders really walks the walk. His son and three beautiful grandchildren live here in the United States. They're United States citizens. Glad to have the Rasmussens on both sides of the Atlantic, bringing us together. Thanks for having me today. When Anders sent the invitation to me, I said yes immediately. So many of these conferences that you all participate in talk about what's wrong with the world. I want to focus on what's going right in the world today, what we've gotten right, and that's democracy, and we know it. It's how to preserve it that is the challenge. There's no nobler goal for all of us. I spent a few years of my life, it's been decades, when I was a young soldier, serving in Germany, patrolling along the Iron Curtain. I've seen tyranny firsthand, and I have dealt with all manner of unfree regimes in my previous role as director of the CIA, and now in my current role as Secretary of State of the United States of America. First principle, there's nothing brave or visionary about oppressing your fellow men or women. Democracy is the only system of government that honors human dignity and personal freedom and progress for mankind. The corollary is that capitalism is the greatest anti-poverty program in all of history. I want to make a few brief remarks, and I'm looking forward to taking questions. First, the idea that Europe is being forced to choose between the United States and China. I want to talk about that at some length. Second, the belief that it's costless to compromise your values. Everywhere I go, I talk to my counterparts in audience like this about the reality of what we see in the world, especially in China. Done in Europe, done in the Arctic, done in Central Asia, done in Africa, done in the Pacific Islands. For many years, the West, in an era of hope, believed we could change the Chinese Communist Party and improve the lives of the Chinese people along the way. That was the bargain. That was the bet. The rising tide of democracy in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union 30 years ago made us believe, perhaps reasonably, that the spread of freedom in every nation was inevitable. So we engaged. We opened ourselves to an authoritarian regime that we knew was hostile to democratic values. Along the way, the Chinese Communist Party made a bet. It bet that it could take advantage of our goodwill while assuring us they wanted a cooperative relationship. As Deng Xiaoping said, hide your strength and bide your time. Talked about why this has happened. It's a complicated story. Fault is not material here. It's not important. Over decades, Americans, European companies invested in China with enormous optimism. I ran a small business. We had an operation in China ourselves. We outsourced our supply chains to places like Shenzhen. We opened our education institutions to PLA-affiliated students. We welcomed Chinese state-backed investment in our own countries. Now we're deeply intertwined. But even so, we must acknowledge a set of facts about who and what we're dealing with. And I think we're seeing this. I think all across the world, this is becoming more apparent each and every day. The Chinese Communist Party decreed an end to freedom in Hong Kong, violating a UN-registered treaty and the rights of its citizens. It's one of just many international treaties that the Chinese Communist Party is violating. General Secretary Xi has greenlighted a brutal campaign of repression against Chinese Muslims, a human rights violations on a scale we have not seen since World War II. The PLA has escalated border tensions. We see them today in India, the world's most populous democracy. We watch as it militarizes the South China Sea and illegally claims more territory there, threatening vital sea lanes, a promise it broke again. But the CCP isn't just a rogue actor in its own neighborhood. If it was, we might think differently about it. It impacts us all. It lied about the coronavirus, and it led spread to the rest of the world while pressuring the World Health Organization to assist in a cover-up campaign. By the way, a failure of transparency that continues even today. Now hundreds of thousands of people have died and the global economy is decimated. Even now, months into the pandemic, we don't have access to a live virus. We don't have access to facilities, and information about patients in December in Wuhan remains unavailable. It's pushing disinformation and malicious cyber campaigns to undermine our governments, to drive a wedge between the United States and Europe, and it's saddling developing nations with debt and dependency. You've seen this all. Everyone in this room knows that the Chinese Communist Party strong-arms nations to do business with Huawei, an arm of the CCP's surveillance state. And it's flagrantly attacking European sovereignty by buying up ports and critical infrastructure. Greece to Valencia. We must take off the golden blinders of economic ties and see that the China challenge isn't just at the gates, it's in every capital. It's in every borough. It's in every province. Every investment from a Chinese state-owned enterprise should be viewed with suspicion. Europe faces a China challenge, just as the United States does, and just as our South American, African, Middle Eastern, and Asian friends do too. And I had a chance earlier this week on Monday to speak with my EU counterparts. I know that there's fear in Europe that the United States wants you to choose between us and China. But it's simply not the case. It's the Chinese Communist Party that's forcing this choice. The choice isn't between the United States, it's between freedom and tyranny. The party that wants to throw away the progress we in the free world have made through NATO and other institutions, both formal and informal institutions, and adopt a new set of rules and norms to accommodate them is in Beijing. I don't believe that there's a uniquely European or American way to face this choice. There's also no way to straddle these alternatives without abandoning who we are. Democracies that are dependent on authoritarians are not worthy of their name. Look, the good news is my European friends, even this week I could see it. It's not uniform. There are different thoughts in different countries, but they're waking up to this challenge. And I heard some of them, they question whether the democratic way of life can win. And Beijing relishes this uncertainty. They shouldn't be confident. We're winning. This is what you talked about in my remarks in Munich. One CCP diplomat in France recently said, quote, "Some Westerners beginning to lose confidence in liberal democracy," quote, end of quote. And some Western countries have become psychologically weak. But democracy isn't fragile in the way the Chinese Communist Party believes it is. Democracy is strong. We defeated fascism. We won the Cold War. It's authoritarianism that is fragile. CCP propagandists work hard to control information flows and speech to maintain their grip on power. They won't be satisfied until the digital firewall extends to our nations too. You know, in some ways it already does. We could talk about this at some length, Anders. And while I do not believe for a moment democracy is fragile, it does require careful stewardship and constant vigilance. I've been encouraged recently in private conversations with European allies who are taking their responsibility seriously. We had a vigorous discussion earlier this week, as I mentioned earlier. We debated what democracies ought to be engaged in. And that's what we do. That's precisely the kind of debate we should have. It was a good meeting, and we'll continue our dialogue with the Europeans on China. Meanwhile, positive steps abound. The new Interparliamentary Alliance on China, substantially comprised of European leaders, is adding new members weekly. Denmark has bravely stood up to the CCP's attempts to censor Danish newspapers. The United Kingdom is moving towards securing its networks from Huawei. The Czechs are standing up to the PRC's coercive diplomacy. The Swedes have closed all of their Confucius institutes that reside on their soil. And our NATO allies have committed to increase defense spending by a cumulative $400 billion between now and 2024. And Anders' successor in Brussels, General Secretary Stoltenberg, recently gave visionary remarks about the alliance's mandate to stand up for a world built on freedom and democracy and to counter China's malign influence in the Asia-Pacific region. I'll end here so Anders can speak. We all know we've lived it. Democracy is not easy. It's messy. The whole world can see how we have tough debates like my country is having right now. But that struggle reflects commitment to fundamental values and our constant striving towards a more perfect union. It's who we are, and we share those values with our European friends. I hope I'll hear more public statements from Europe about China challenge because all of our people deserve to know about it. And America is ready to stand with you. Let's speak clearly, and more importantly, let's act decisively. Let's not leave any confusion about the choice between tyranny and freedom.